Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 39 of the 2020 podcast series, and the first episode of the post-draft edition. That's right. The first ever completely virtual draft was held last week, and I thought the league really did a tremendous job. Went off without a hitch, no technical issues. Really got to see players and their families at home. Got to see the front office executives, their setups, the GMs, the head coaches, and Roger Goodell from his basement, and really got to see him in his easy chair by the end of day one. Really thought it was well done, well put together. Joe Burrow away to Tae Crowder Thursday through Saturday. I thought it was really a tremendous job. Over 250 players heard their names called, and we're going to look at each team's draft board. That's right. We're going to take a look at all 30 teams, take a look at every single pick. We're also going to look at some of the guys that were the biggest draft snubs in that undrafted free agent pool. And then finally, to top things off, before we go ahead and call it a season, we'll take a look at 2021, kind of do a very early look at the 2021 draft. And really, when you think about last year and when we did our 2020 look ahead, we talked about Justin Herbert. We talked about potentially Tua Tagovailoa if he were to come out. Joe Burrow was nowhere to be found. Joe Burrow was essentially a guy that was looked at as no more than maybe a 6th or 7th round selection coming out of LSU after his junior season. And even Joe Burrow admits, look, I wasn't a very good quarterback back then. And Joe Brady coming in, he and Steve Emsminger really working with Joe Burrow. And you see what happened with that Heisman Trophy winning season. And now he's the number 1 overall pick. So you never know what's going to happen between now and the draft next year. So we're going to go ahead and jump in, and we'll take a look at some of the players to start to get to know, because that's really what we do with ReadyForTheDraft.com and the Ready for the Draft podcast. Is we want to get you ready for the NFL draft as quickly as possible. Start hearing those names, guys that you really need to be looking out for as we get closer and closer to the draft. So we're not done with the 2020 draft, though. So what I want to do is, like I said, break down every single team, take a look at their draft picks, take a look at my draft board as well, and really what I saw happening there for each of the teams. And we'll go ahead and get things started. Let's start with Arizona and the Cardinals. Steve Keim, Cliff Kingsbury obviously took Kyler Murray a season ago with the number 1 overall pick. 3 straight seasons with 50-plus sacks given up. I was expecting Arizona to take a tackle first and foremost. And you have DJ Humphries on this team as the left tackle. And so I thought perfect way to get a right tackle there. Especially with Andrew Thomas sitting there coming off the board to the Giants at number 4 overall. I thought this was a perfect spot for Jedrick Wills. I think Jedrick Wills has the athleticism to play left tackle, but frankly, this was a guy who was an All-American right tackle at Alabama. So it had the makings of a perfect fit. Match made in heaven, really sitting there at number 8. But I wasn't anticipating Isaiah Simmons being on the board, being available at number 8. Now, real quick, what I wanted to kind of take a look at is Arizona's situation now on defense. That linebacking core, you have Chandler Jones rushing the pass. You also have Devon Kennard that they brought in from the Lions. Interior, the inside linebackers, you have Jordan Hicks, you have Hassan Reddick, and then you bring in Devondre Campbell on a 1-year deal from Atlanta. The athleticism is off the charts with this group, and then you add Isaiah Simmons to that mix. That's really, where does he fit in all of that? You brought in, like I said, Kennard, he's a pass rusher. Chandler Jones, double-digit sack guy as well. Campbell, Hicks, Hassan Reddick. It's one of those things. It's kind of a peculiar your pick, to some degree. But then you look at the secondary, and you're like, okay, you've got Budda Baker playing the free safety position. Jalen Thompson right now is your strong safety. So what does that look like? Could Isaiah Simmons and Devon Kennard be, could they both be on the field at the same time? Could we potentially see Isaiah Simmons rotate to an inside backer position, for portions of the game? At some point you're going to want to have Chandler Jones and Devon Kennard on the field at the same time rushing the quarterback. I think when that happens, though, you want to have Isaiah Simmons. He can kind of be that at safety, on the back end of that defense. So at least it gives you a lot of options, things to really play with there on the defensive side of the football. And I think that's something that Vance Joseph is really going to take advantage of, is a lot of that talent and that speed there on the defense. So Isaiah Simmons going there, number 8 overall, 6'4", 238 pounds. And really after that, Arizona didn't have a second round pick. So in round number 3, I wasn't expecting there to be a ton of tackles on the board that would be worthy of Arizona drafting them to ultimately start at right tackle. Yes, they brought in Marcus Gilbert. He's 32 years of age, battled some injuries, only signed to a 1-year deal though. So he's clearly not the long-term answer. Josh Jones falls into their laps there with the 8th pick in the 3rd round. 6'5", 319 out of Houston. Started over 40 games for the Cougars, in over 1,200 pass snaps. I believe it was only 18 pressures, according to Pro Football Focus. This guy he's athletic. I think he moves pretty well. I think, he got by on his athleticism more so than technique. So he does need probably a year of seasoning and getting to play behind Marcus Gilbert, the veteran. I think he'll be able to learn quite a bit in that O-line room, and a guy who I think could develop into a pretty darn good right tackle there at the next level. So moving on to round number 4, you've got Leki Fotu, the defensive tackle out of Utah, and this was kind of a peculiar pick for me because they just brought in Jordan Phillips to man the nose tackle position, and really, when I was looking at Arizona and where I thought they would go, I was looking at running back and corner. And the reason being is running back, you look at Kenyon Drake, you look at Chase Edmonds. I was thinking they would take A.J. Dillon in round number 3. Ultimately, A.J. Dillon was taken in round 2, so that didn't end up happening. He wouldn't be available anyway, and really they waited until round number 7, still got a running back that can make an impact for them. And then at the cornerback position, I guess they're standing pat with Patrick Peterson, Byron Murphy, Robert Alford, Jalen Davis. Patrick Peterson's in the last year of his deal. And, I guess what they could have done at number 8 was potentially look at C.J. Henderson. But I think they must be satisfied with that corner position because they didn't address the position really at all in the draft. I thought they could have gotten another piece there, potentially moved Byron Murphy to the slot, and could have brought in another corner there in round 3. But, they ended up getting their tackle. Round 4, they get Fotu to pair up with Jordan Phillips, so you at least have some depth there at the position. So you've already seen on defense what they've been able to do is, they added depth with the addition of Simmons. Then they get Leki Fotu, additionally adding some depth. And then round number 4, 25th overall pick, they get Rashard Lawrence out of LSU, 6'2", 308. And this is another, they're adding more depth. And I think that's really what the theme was there for Arizona defensively. You have Zach Allen, you have Corey Peters there at the defensive end position, Michael Dogba and Jonathan Bullard, Trevon Coley as well. Rashard Lawrence isn't going to wow you with the athleticism by any means, but a guy who just gets the job done, very intelligent player, and a guy who I think is going to be a nice rotational piece there for the Cardinals. Moving on to the 6th round, another linebacker, inside backer, Evan Weaver out of Cal, 6'2", 237 pounds, over 180 tackles as a senior. This guy has a nose for the football, very high football IQ. I think that's one of the things that you can say looking at this draft class is a lot of really intelligent, high football IQ football players. And I think this is a guy that Vance Joseph is going to really enjoy, having on his defense. I thought he showed a little bit more athleticism at the combine than people were expecting, ran in the 4.7s. And a guy, look, he's not going to be the explosive guy, but at the same time, he knows where the football is going to be and he's going to take the right angle. He drops into coverage, reads the quarterback's eyes really well. He is limited athletically, but a guy who I would say, when you look at that interior linebacker position, give him a couple of years, and I think Evan Weaver can be a starter in this league. I mentioned the running back in round 7. They get Eno Benjamin, the 2-time 1,000-yard rusher, as a sophomore, over 1,600 yards. There for Herm Edwards as a junior, over 1,000 yards. Didn't put up quite the same season that he did, previously, but over 60 receptions in his career. This is a guy who has tremendous hands. As a runner, he's pretty good between the tackles, runs with a low pad level. He's known for his spin moves. He spins out of tackles. I look at Benjamin and I look at Kenyon Drake and Chase Edmonds, and I just feel like, what they really needed was that power back. A guy that's really going to complement their skill set. And I just feel like Benjamin is another guy who just fits right along with that same mold as Drake and Chase Edmonds. So I think I like the pick. I think this is another weapon for Kyler Murray in that offense, but it's just a little peculiar that that's who they ended up targeting. If there was anyone that I would probably look at, you probably look at those round 4 picks. You probably could have gotten a running back there that had a little bit more power than Benjamin, but I'm not going to fault him for it at the same time, because Benjamin, highly productive. I think at the end of the day, the lack of ball security with Benjamin was really what sent him down draft boards. I know that was one of the things that was most frustrating for me, was a guy that just couldn't really hang on to the football. And he ran that 4.57, so he wasn't the most explosive, but had a 39-inch vertical leap and 6.97 3-cone drill. So has some explosiveness, maybe a little bit quicker than fast type of player. So I think Arizona did well with their draft overall. Looking at Atlanta, the Falcons, they had the 16th overall pick, and this was a pick where everyone was talking about how Atlanta was looking to trade up to either get Javon Kinlaw or C.J. Henderson. And so that meant that they were either targeting an interior pass rusher or a corner to replace Desmond Trufant, and really that lockdown corner that's going to play opposite Isaiah Oliver. And so C.J. Henderson ends up going off the board, number 9 overall, to the Jags. And then at number 13, Javon Kinlaw's gone. You don't have a defensive tackle that you're going to be able to take, after Derek Brown and Kinlaw are off the board. And, after C.J. Henderson, you actually have a couple of corners. You probably could have traded down and still gotten A.J. Terrell out of Clemson, but I'm not going to fault them for it. They needed a lockdown corner, 6'1", 195. Terrell, the last time we saw him in a Clemson uniform, he didn't play very well against Jamar Chase, ate him up. But one game does not define a 3-year career that had more ups and downs. I thought A.J. Terrell was, especially when he played opposite, Trayvon Mullen, I thought he played exceptionally well. A guy uses his length to his advantage, has pretty good ball skills. He's going to get a chance, again, playing opposite Isaiah Oliver. Really young secondary. You have, Kendall Sheffield there in that secondary as well. And, Jordan Miller from Washington, and then Bleedy Ray Wilson was actually brought in as the veteran in the group. So, that's the one thing. I think there are still going to be some growing pains there, but, I think Dimitroff and Quinn knew they had to target a corner early in the draft. So getting A.J. Terrell, you can make some arguments. Some people, thought Noah Igbenogany. Some people thought Trevon Diggs, Jeff Gladney, a lot of different names thrown out there. I wouldn't fault him for taking A.J. Terrell. I'm okay with that pick. Moving on to round number 2, the Marlon Davidson out of Auburn, 6'3", 303. He was playing in the 270s. And he bulked up at the combine, still ran like a 5.07 40. A guy who can put pressure on the quarterback. I thought he was a little inconsistent at times, especially when he played with a higher pad level. And what's interesting about this pick is he's probably going to be a defensive tackle. So I think what that means is you bring in Dante Fowler, who had a career year, 11.5 sacks, with the Rams, a season ago. And what he had going for him was an interior pass rush led by, obviously, the man, big number 99, Aaron Donald. So you have to duplicate that here in Atlanta. And you have Grady Jarrett, a guy who can, put pressure on the quarterback from the interior, but they don't really have anybody else on the interior of that defensive line. So bringing in Marlon Davidson as a defense, he's clearly going to be a defensive tackle playing at 300 pounds. You're anticipating that this is going to be a guy that can put pressure on the quarterback from within. He did kick inside at times on passing situations and would rush, as an interior pass rusher. Played a 5 technique predominantly in a 34 defense. There were times where you'd have a 4-man front with Big Cat Bryant or Nick Coe when he entered the game. So when you had that 4-man front, he would either play end or inside a tackle, and someone who I think can put pressure on the quarterback a little bit. So I had him coming off the board in round 2, so decent value there. I had Matt Hennessy going to Atlanta for quite a while. I ultimately moved him up in the draft. I was actually expecting him to come off the board earlier. But to get him in the 3rd round, 6'4", 307 center out of Temple, does play with a little bit of a high pad level at times, doesn't generate a ton of movement in the running game. But this is a guy who's going to protect Matt Ryan. He's very athletic, excellent agility laterally. I want to say that he had 2 pressures that he gave up in 2018, according to Pro Football Focus, one of the best pass protectors at the center position. And when I look at Matt Hennessy for the Falcons, what I really like is I look at Alex Mack and what Alex Mack was when he entered the league, and I look at Matt Hennessy and I see some parallels there with the athleticism and their high football IQ. Alex Mack, 34 years of age, entering the last year of his contract. There's a good chance that he may retire at the end of the season. And with these centers that have made some abrupt retirements with Travis Frederick and Max Unger before him, I think Atlanta getting that heir apparent now is not a bad move at all. The next couple of picks were really questionable for me in my eyes. On day 3, you take Michael Walker, outside linebacker out of Fresno State, 6'3", 230 pounds. A guy who is athletic. He has tremendous range. A guy that could play in coverage and play behind the line of scrimmage a little bit as well. When I look at this defense and I look at the linebacking core, Michael Walker, to me, it feels like they're trying to replace Devondre Campbell. His length, his athleticism, and I think with Michael Walker, he feels more like a 6th round pick to me, 6th to 7th round. And so I thought they kind of reached in round number 4. Granted, they didn't have a pick in round 6 to target him. They could have potentially, though, traded back and still landed this guy. Same goes for Jalen Hawkins, 4th rounder, the safety out of Cal, 6'1", 208. This is a guy who I think they're going to be looking at challenging Ricardo Allen for that starting spot. Ricardo Allen is signed through the 2021 season. But when you look at Jalen Hawkins, definitely has some ball skills, but a guy to me that he's looking to make a play on the football. Never had more than 50 tackles in a season. Just 7 pass breakups in his career. So the 6 interceptions in 2018 as a junior, never really duplicated those efforts. Did have 3 interceptions in 2019, 10 total in his career. But to me, I look at him and I think there were other guys you could have potentially targeted there in round number 4, and then finally round 7 to round things out. Ryan Allen, the punter, is a guy who I think is kind of that marked man. He came in, played 8 games for the Falcons, and they bring in Sterling Hoffrichter to challenge him for that spot. 5'10", 196, the punter out of Syracuse. A guy that can handle some kickoff duties as well. I think Ryan Allen, especially if Hoffrichter can have a decent training camp, Ryan Allen may be out of a job because I think Hoffrichter, if you just look at the average, you're not going to be blown away, but this is a guy who can definitely pin the ball inside the 20, though granted, I think that's one of Ryan Allen's specialties as well. So I think that'll be an interesting battle come training camp. Now, Baltimore. Holy cow. This draft, 10 draft picks, and I'm looking at them, and all of these guys have a chance to make an impact. I think it's phenomenal what they did. And to have 6 picks in the first 2 days and to do what they did with them is just is staggering. And I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit to kind of fit the narrative for me. But Baltimore, we knew they were going to double up at the inside linebacker position. I said that right at the beginning. You had to target multiple inside linebackers, because when you lose Patrick Umwasser and Josh Bynes, you're not left with anything. You'd already traded away C.J. Mosley to the Jets, so you're in dire need of an inside linebacker. And so they get Patrick Queen out of LSU, 6 foot, 229 pounds in round number 1, 28th overall pick. I had Kenneth Murray going here to the Ravens for quite a while. Ultimately expected him to come off the board a little bit earlier. I was expecting Queen to end up going to the Saints at 24 overall. The fact that he fell to the Ravens at 28, that made it a no-brainer that was where he was going. And if you watched LSU's tape during the season defensively, whether you were trying to watch Grant Delpit or Rashard Lawrence or Jacob Phillips, whoever it was that you were trying to watch, either of the corners, Christian Fulton or Derek Stingley, number 8 always seemed to flash. And he was a guy that at the beginning of the season was out of position, but by the end of the season, this guy was flat out dominant. He was all over the field, making plays both in coverage and with the sideline to sideline range, making plays behind the line of scrimmage as well. Was the defensive player of the game in the national title win over Clemson. Day 1 starter right there. Then with their third pick in round number 3, the 34th overall pick in round 3, you get Malik Harrison out of Ohio State, 6'3", 247 pounds, very versatile guy, another guy that can drop into coverage, a guy that plays well between the tackles. And Queen is going to be your guy that's going to go sideline to sideline. I think Harrison can really play between the tackles and can drop into coverage. So I think these guys are going to complement each other very well, and they'll be coming onto the roster at the same time. So you may have some growing pains there at the inside backer position, but two guys who I think are very intelligent players. And to see Queen's development from beginning of the year to year end, and Malik Harrison, the veteran there for the Buckeyes, I think it was really a nice moves there in the first 2 days of the draft. In round number 2, they get a running back. They get J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State, 5'10", 209 pounds, the only Buckeye not named Archie Griffin to rush for 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Not even Eddie George did that. Hall of Famer, the great Eddie George, not even he was able to do it, right? And so when you think about that, and you think about, Eddie George and what he was able to do there, collegiate Hall of Famer, and Tennessee Titans lore, and just a guy who was so productive, and yet J.K. Dobbins is the only other guy to eclipse that 1,000-yard mark in 3 straight seasons. It's quite remarkable. Dobbins went over 2,000 yards as a junior, and a guy who I think is quicker than he is fast. He definitely has a lateral agility that's off the charts. But I think he does have some explosiveness. Ran away from a lot of guys, and I think that's one of the things that I think people don't really give him credit for. Didn't run the 40 at the combine, but a guy who I think he's going to surprise some people. And you pair him up with Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram's going to give you a little bit more of the power. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to give you more of the elusiveness. A great 1-2 punch there with Lamar Jackson in the backfield. Round 3, I thought this was a steal, getting Justin Madubuike, falling to them at the top of round number 3. I had him coming off the board beginning of round 2. 6'3", 293, the defensive tackle out of Texas A&M. Very quick, ran a sub 5 flat 40. Very powerfully built, powerful upper body, a guy that can bench press this man, get off the block and shoot into the backfield, a guy who can rush the passer and make plays behind the line of scrimmage. And what's interesting here is, I look at him and I see an ability to be that 3 technique in their 34 defense. Derek Wolfe signed to a 1-year deal. I think Justin Madubuike is the defensive tackle there of the future, playing opposite Calais Campbell there for the Ravens. So I thought that was a nice pick as well. Devin Duvernay, if you watch the draft, John Harbaugh got really excited with this pick, and I know why. I mean, 5'11", 200 pounds, sub 4.40 speed. At Texas, over 100 receptions, 106 receptions to be exact. Really took over that receiver position. Colin Johnson battling some injuries. When you look at this receiving core, You have Marquise Brown, who's going to be your vertical threat. Hollywood loves to get vertical, that speed that he has. Miles Boykin, very explosive receiver, has the size. Willie Snead, a consummate performer there. Then you have guys like Chris Moore and Jaleel Scott, DeAnthony Thomas, guys who are really going to be battling for their jobs, because Duvernay, to me, I think you put him in the slot and he's very sure-handed, more explosive than people give him credit for, and a guy who's very powerfully built at 5'11", 200 pounds, a guy who I think is stronger after the catch than people, again, give him credit for. Round 6, James Prochet. The fact that they were able to get a guy like James Prochet that late in the draft, I think speaks to the amount of depth at the wide receiver position in this draft class. James Prochet is, he's like a ballerina out there. I mean, really, the ability to contort his body to make the acrobatic catches, it's absolutely ridiculous. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, over 300 receptions in his career, just under 4,000 total yards and 39 touchdowns. You add him to the mix, he's definitely a possession receiver. And, if I'm Lamar Jackson, I'm definitely excited with, the weapons that I have around me. Finishing out, jumping back to round number 3 and round number 4, you get a couple of guards that I think have a chance to start sooner rather than later. You have Tyree Phillips out of Mississippi State, 6'5", 331 pounds. I wasn't as high on him as a lot of other people were. I thought that he was a guy that lacks some athleticism, but definitely is a guy that's going to generate some power, and I think playing that guard position makes a ton of sense. And then Ben Bredesen in round number 4, 6'5", 315 out of Michigan, over 40 starts in his career at the left guard position, playing there next to John Runyon. I thought the two of them worked really well together. A guy that can climb to the second level, not known for his athleticism, but sustains his blocks, keeps a low pad level, excellent hands. And when you look at this, the guard position, you have Bradley Bozeman, you have Ben Powers on the roster. If nothing else, Phillips and Bredesen give you excellent depth at the position. But I think that these two may have actually upgraded the Ravens at the interior line, along the interior line. It's going to really be interesting to see how all of it plays out. Bradley Bozeman has some experience at center, and you have Matt Skura coming back from a gruesome leg injury. So there's a chance that Bozeman could kick inside, in which case Bredesen or Phillips could end up sliding into that starting spot right away, week 1. Round number 5, a little curious pick, Broderick Washington, very powerful at the point of attack. I think, the powerful bull rusher at nose tackle, 6'2", 305. But you got a guy in Dalen Mack that was already on the roster. Plus you have Brandon Williams starting there at the nose tackle position. So I thought that was a little bit of a curious pick there to take Broderick Washington. And then round 7, I thought they got a bit of a steal here. Geno Stone out of Iowa, the safety, 5'10", 207. I look at Geno Stone. He needs some time to develop. He was a junior that came out, really had 1 year of tremendous production. But Chuck Clark is the strong safety right now. I think they're on the market to upgrade at that position. And yes, they have Jordan Richards and Anthony Levine there. I think Geno Stone can come in and battle them for that backup spot right away. And I think Geno Stone in a year or two could end up taking over that starting spot there at strong safety for the Ravens. Overall, Ravens, I thought, did a tremendous job with this draft. Definitely a top 10 worthy draft. When you look at it, when you break down all of these drafts, they have a lot of impact players, and I think every single one of these guys has a great chance to make that roster and potentially even make an impact. Moving on to Buffalo now. Now Buffalo, no first round pick. Why? They got their number 1 wideout. I targeted T Higgins to the Buffalo Bills until they traded their first round pick to get Stephon Diggs. Definitely worth it. Stephon Diggs absolutely has proven himself, and really, frankly, kind of deserves a chance to be the number 1 guy. He doesn't have Adam Thielen there with him, so you look at that Buffalo wide receiving core, and you now have Stephon Diggs as your 1. You have John Brown as your vertical threat, and you have Cole Beasley as your slot receiver. So I think that's already upgraded the position. A position where they had to hunt down Duke Williams from the CFL to get a big body there at the wideout position. So wide receiver, we will be talking about wide receiver before long. They did pick up a couple of receivers in the draft. When I'm looking at round 2, number 22 overall in the second round, AJ Epinesa, had a chance to be a first round pick. Some hyped him as a top 10 pick. I think after running the 5:04.40, that really quelled any arguments about the first round. But I still thought there was a chance that he would sneak in, possibly to Seattle at 27. Ultimately didn't come to fruition. And what you get with AJ Epinesa, definitely a guy that has tremendous power, especially in his hands, has a decent get off, but a guy, great technique, uses, again, those hands to his advantage, and the push pull, one of the best in all of college football. A guy, he was beaten by Austin Jackson with his quickness, but when he was able to get his hands on Austin Jackson and overpower him, that's really where I thought you saw that success. Really that soft edge coming off. And when you look at AJ Epinesa and you look at this, the defensive end position, they have Mario Addison, who they brought in from Carolina, and you have Jerry Hughes, who's still under contract for another year after the 2020 season. AJ Epinesa kind of right now looks like he's going to be that number 3 rusher. You already drafted Ed Oliver a season ago, so I think they're continuing to add to that rotational pass rush group there up front. So I'm not mad at the AJ Epinesa group. That might have actually been the best player available at that point. In round number 3, you get a running back. Zach Moss out of Utah, 5'9", 223, and what you have there with the Bills, you lost Frank Gore, and I think Zach Moss can come in and be another Frank Gore type guy. I mean, he's built the same way. Devin Singletary, definitely very elusive, a guy that has the lateral agility. You already have TJ Yeldon on the roster as well, but Zach Moss runs with a low pad level, runs over guys at times, pretty physical running back, has excellent hands. The biggest thing with Zach Moss is, can he stay healthy? That's going to be the biggest question mark. That and, that 4.65 40, he's not going to be a burner. Definitely a guy who's going to be quicker than he is fast. I think he has some of the lateral cuts that you saw him make, making some guys miss in the hole. And then the powerful leg drive, that lower body strength. If he can stay healthy, I think he'd be a nice compliment there for Devin Singletary. Now, I mentioned the receivers. They got one in round 4 and one in round 6. They got bigger receivers. You had John Brown and you have Cole Beasley on the roster, but they didn't really have much size. You had to bring in Duke Williams, like I said, to get some of that size. And I'm looking at Gabriel Davis out of UCF, 6'2", 216 pounds, big physical wideout, a guy that can get vertical, can get over the top. And then Isaiah Hodgins, more of a possession guy, 6'4", 210, runs in the 4.6s there at Oregon, but went over 1,000 yards receiving for the Beavers. And look, Isaiah Hodgins, very reliable hands. I think he's going to be a possession receiver, and I think he's going to be one of those guys that could potentially be Josh Allen's security blanket when it's all said and done. So I like those two receivers. I like those picks. I thought great value for both. Round number 5, you get a quarterback. You get Jake Fromm, the 6'2", 219-pound junior out of Georgia. The reason why Jacob Eason ultimately ended up with the Washington Huskies this past year. Jake Fromm, interesting case, a guy who is definitely intelligent, the football IQ. You see him make all the pre-snap reads, understands where to go with the football, makes quick decisions, but not athletically gifted. He doesn't have the big arm that some of these other quarterbacks have. But, in that 5th, 6th round range, remember, Tom Brady was a 6th round pick. I'm not comparing Jake Fromm to Tom Brady, but, in terms of how they go about the game, how they process things, I think that's really where you see some of those similarities. And, with Jake Fromm, he's going there. You already have Josh Allen as your number 1, but look, Josh Allen is a mobile quarterback, a guy that likes to get outside and run. And a lot of those quarterbacks, what ends up happening is they do end up going down to injury. And just ask Philly what happened with Carson Wentz when they went down. If they didn't have Nick Foles, where would they be? You look at New Orleans, Drew Brees, out of action. You have Teddy Bridgewater that you're able to bring in. They go 5-0. Could they have gone 5-0 without Teddy Bridgewater? You have to have a solid backup. So getting Jake Fromm in round number 5 makes a ton of sense. Round 6, you get Tyler Bass, the best kicker, I think, in the draft out of Georgia Southern. What's interesting, though, is you have Steven Hauschka on the roster. I think Hauschka is 34 years of age. I think if nothing else, you bring Bass in and challenge him. But I think it's going to be one of those to where it's still Hauschka's job to lose. And then finally, in round number 7, here's a pick that I really like. Dane Jackson out of Pittsburgh, 6 foot 187, and a guy who has tremendous ball skills. Didn't put up an overly fast 40 time, ran a 4.57. And a guy who I think lacks some of that vertical speed, but at the same time he has the ball skills. 39 pass breakups in his career, has 4 forced fumbles as well. Has a nose for the football. He even returned one of his 4 interceptions for a touchdown. So this guy just is a playmaker. And when you look at that secondary, you have Josh Norman. He's signed to I believe a 1-year deal. You have Tre'Davious White, who's going to be your star there at the left cornerback position. Teron Johnson's the nickel right now. Levi Wallace, EJ Gaines, only under contract through the 2020 season. Dane Jackson has a chance to be the number 3 corner right away and could potentially end up being a starter whenever Josh Norman ultimately either hangs it up or moves on from Buffalo. So all in all, I like some of the picks that Buffalo made. I think with some of them, they drafted based on need. At least with AJ Epinesa, I think they were actually targeting the best player available. Moving on to Carolina. So Carolina really screwed my draft up. I was trying to predict what Matt Rule was going to do, and I was expecting them to replace. Well, you can't really replace Luke Kuechly, but the production, 137 tackles that he averaged, and all the interceptions and the sacks and just the playmaking ability and getting a leader there in the middle of that defense. But when you think about Matt Rule and Phil Snow and what did they do at Baylor? They had an incredible offensive or defensive front. You had James Lynch, Bravion Roy, and James Lockhart. And if you went to Temple before that, what did they have? They had a really physical front. And that's really what Matt Rule is looking to do there at Carolina. So it makes sense that they bring in Derek Brown, the big 6'5", 325-pounder out of Auburn with the number 7 overall pick. This guy's going to be a day 1 starter, an impact starter right away for Carolina. Makes perfect sense. You're going to be getting a 34 defense there from Phil Snow. So Derek Brown going to be that nose tackle, very physical at the point of attack, powerful hands, a guy that can collapse a pocket from within, also has the quickness to get quick penetration and disrupt plays. Round 2, though, this is the next pick that I think is really interesting. You already have K'Wan Short, but then you're going to pair Yetur Gross-Matos with him. And you brought in Stephen Weatherly from Minnesota, but I think he's going to be the role player. I think Yetur Gross-Matos with that length, a guy who makes a living in opposing backfields as a sophomore, had 20 tackles for loss, 82 and a quarter inch wingspan on this kid as well. Tremendous athlete. And you put him and Derek Brown, you're already seeing a formidable front. Then you add in Brian Burns with the speed coming off the edge, and you really see now what Matt Rule is trying to do there in Carolina. Get some of that toughness, bring that back to the defense. What does he do in round number 2 with the 32nd overall pick? He brings in Jeremy Chin, the safety out of Southern Illinois, 6'3", 221 pounds. Another kid who, it's tremendous. The latest safety that comes from an FCS school. And the thing that I really like about Jeremy Chin, he can pretty much do a little bit of everything. Has tremendous range, over 240 tackles in his career, 31 pass breakups, 13 interceptions. A guy who averaged at least 3 interceptions in each of his 4 seasons there at Southern Illinois, 6 forced fumbles as well. This guy, another playmaker, big physical dude. And you play him at the strong safety, Trey Boston at the free safety, and you're set there at the safety position. So again, you see what he's doing. And Matt Rule, after the draft, actually told NFL Network and ESPN, he said, "Look, we addressed the offense in free agency. We brought in Robbie Anderson at receiver, Russell Okung, you traded for him at the left tackle position, and you bring in Teddy Bridgewater at the quarterback position, and Cam Newton moved on, Christian McCaffrey getting signed as well. So, Carolina, a lot of different, moving parts in play there. And defense was really what they focused on. And what's crazy is every single one of those picks was used on the defensive side of the football. And on day 3, you bring in Troy Pride Jr., the corner out of Notre Dame, a guy who has tremendous long speed, can run with just about anybody. And that cornerback position, look, he's going to come in, he's going to battle Corn Elder, Cole Luke for that starting spot opposite Dante Jackson. Now that James Bradbury's gone, you really need to solidify that position. They also also drafted Stanley Thomas Oliver III, another player with tremendous length. He was their 7th round pick, 6', 192 out of Florida International. So you bring in 2 corners. You also bring in 2 safeties. So he's really addressing that secondary. And what do they do in round 5? But they bring in Kenny Robinson, the 6'2", 198-pound safety out of West Virginia. Had 5 interceptions in his career with the Mountaineers. Decides after leaving West Virginia, rather than transfer to another school, he's going to go ahead and train for the draft. Well, the XFL comes knocking, and he ends up playing with the St. Louis Battlehawks. What does he do? He has 2 interceptions in 5 games, tremendous ball skills. I think he's proven that he's not going to be a distraction. Was a model citizen there with the XFL. Comes in round number 5, and a guy who I think would be that 3rd safety. I think he can even play a little bit of corner in a pinch as well. You've got a playmaker, proven himself, in the professional ranks. Obviously, the NFL is to jump up and play from the XFL, but I really like the value there in round number 5. And then round 6, Matt Rule gets his Baylor guy. I was expecting it to be James Lynch, but ultimately, instead, they go with Bravion Roy, the aforementioned Bravion Roy out of 6'1", 330 pounds, the nose tackle. This is a guy who I think can hold the point of attack, but he's really known for his explosiveness. Very, very quick first step off the ball, has a really nice swim move as well. There was a kind of a NASCAR type package where Phil Snow had all of his interior linemen, and really the entire defensive front. They were all in a 2-point stance. They're all standing up. And Bravion Roy, look, he and James Lynch and James Lockhart, they wreaked havoc in Big 12 backfields. And I can guarantee you Jalen Hurts did not want to see these guys multiple times during the season because these guys got after it. And Bravion Roy, to me, I thought he had the talent to be drafted much higher than that. You put him in there as a rotational guy with Derek Brown. If Phil Snow decides to run a 4-man front for any reason, it would really be interesting to see Derek Brown and Bravion Roy playing side by side. I really like what Carolina did. They didn't really address anything on the offensive side of the football, but you can see what his focus is really to rebuild that team. He wants to get that toughness on the defensive side of the ball, and I thought he absolutely did that. The Bears, no 1st-round pick, traded that in the trade for Khalil Mack, but they have 2 second-round picks, and the first one they used on Cole Kmet. I actually had them pegged to take Cole Kmet with their 2nd pick, which was just 7 picks later. But Cole Kmet, 6'6", 262 pounds out of Notre Dame, probably the most complete tight end. I don't think he's the most explosive by any means. Ran a 4.7 40, but a guy who has tremendous hands. I think he's a decent inline blocker. Look, he played on the baseball team there at Notre Dame, tremendous athlete. Then they you have Jimmy Graham there as well, but Cole Kmet's going to be the future at the position. You can definitely mark that down. And then I thought, the 2nd pick in round number 2, they get Jalen Johnson out of Utah, 6', 193, has battled some injuries, and I think that's why he didn't, garner real serious 1st-round talk. But I think he has a chance to battle Artie Burns for that starting spot opposite Kyle Fuller. Keep an eye on that matchup as we get into training camp. I think he has a great chance to start right away for the Bears. Now, they didn't have any other picks until round number 5. Had a couple of picks there. 10th pick in round number 5, they get Trevis Gibson, 6'3", 261 out of Tulsa. You're getting to get a situational pass rusher, a guy who knows how to get after the quarterback there for the Golden Hurricanes. You have Khalil Mack, you have Robert Quinn at your linebacker positions. Not a whole lot of depth behind them. Barkevius Mingo is on the roster. They brought him in from Houston, but I think this is going to be a guy who could, like I said, if nothing else, he's going to be a situational pass rusher, and I think can make an impact early in his career. Then they look to the cornerback position again. They double up at the position. They get Kendall Vildor out of Georgia Southern, 5'10", 191 pounds, excellent ball skills, a guy who's one of the stronger corners, and really just secondary, players, period. 23 reps at 225 in the bench press, ran in the 4.4s. Tremendous athlete. I think great value in the fifth round. And I look at the corner position. You have Kyle Fuller, like I mentioned. You have Burns and Jalen Johnson. This is a guy who I think could potentially target for the slot, or be a nickel. And I think a guy who has tremendous upside, very athletic. I really like that pick. The last three picks were a little questionable for me. Round 5, Darnell Mooney out of Marshall, 5'10", 176. I actually had the Bear, targeted the Bears to go after a bigger receiver, big physical, like Chase Claypool. When I look at their receiving core right now, they have Allen Robinson as their number 1. You have Cordero Patterson, no more as a returner than as a receiver. Anthony Miller has battled some injuries. He's more of your possession guy, not overly quick, overly fast. Javon Wims is a bigger guy, but not overly explosive. So you get Darnell Mooney, a guy that runs sub 4.4 there for the Tulane Green Wave, and a guy who I think can make some plays. Probably a guy that you'll line up in the slot. But I thought there were some other receivers out on the board that you could have gone with. Moving on to round 7, I think the Bears, they have their offensive line that they needed to target. Rashad Coward there at the right guard position. They brought in Jermaine Ifedi to kind of target that area. You have James Daniels at left guard. So at least, in terms of getting some depth, I kind of like the Lachavious Simmons pick there with the 13th pick in round number 7, 6'5", 304 out of Tennessee State. But a pick before that, they took Arlington Hambright out of Colorado, 6'4", 307. The tackle was not invited to the combine. And a guy who, was just, if I look at my notes, I really noted that he was athletic, but he was just kind of a guy, to me. I didn't see him as, someone who would ultimately end up making a roster. So it was a little bit of a curious pick for me, a guy that possibly could end up kicking inside to guard. But I think they could have addressed that tackle position much sooner. I think, Charles Leno, Bobby Massey, you need to potentially get another tackle on that roster. And I don't think that the Bears really did that. Bengals. I love what the Bengals did with their draft. Obviously, you get Joe Burrow with the number 1 overall pick. That makes a whole lot of sense, obviously. Zach Taylor gets his guy. If I'm Andy Dalton, I'm looking at potentially moving on to another NFL franchise. My days probably are numbered there in Cincy. At the top of round 2, how in the world was T. Higgins still sitting there? They get a big receiver, 6'4", 216 pounds, a vertical threat. I think I want to say it was 23 deep balls. He caught 15 of those for 565 yards, according to Pro Football Focus. Definitely a guy who can be a weapon down the football field. A guy who, if you put on the ACC championship game against Virginia, he showed why he can be a dominant force down the football field. And guess who Joe Burrow worked out with prior to the to the NFL draft? He worked out with T. Higgins, so there's already some chemistry there. You've got AJ Green coming back, who was the franchise player. You have, or use the franchise tag on him. You have Tyler Boyd, 1,000-yard receiver. You have John Ross and his speed. Adding T. Higgins to the mix, this is a guy that ultimately, if AJ Green can't return to his former self, T. Higgins can ultimately step into that role. 2 linebackers in rounds 3 and 4, 2 of my favorite guys in this entire draft, and they're on the same team. So I couldn't be more excited for these 2 picks. Logan Wilson, 6'2", 241 out of Wyoming, over 400 tackles, a guy who has sideline-to-sideline range, can drop into coverage, can also rush the quarterback, make plays behind the line of scrimmage, does a little bit of everything. Best linebacker nobody's talked about. And then in round 4, at the top of the third day of the draft, you get Akeem Davis-Gaither, the 6'2", 224-pound outside linebacker of Appalachian State. Dude, a guy who has tremendous range, a guy that can drop into coverage, sideline to sideline type player. You've got some athletes at that linebacker position now. And really, when you talk about that linebacker position, Jordan Evans there, Jermaine Pratt. Jermaine Pratt's another one of those new age linebackers. You have Josh Bynes on the roster as well. So it's really going to be interesting to see what they're going to do. They have a ton of linebackers. So really what's the plan? Are we going to be seeing a hybrid defense there where they're going to run some 3-man fronts, that's something to really kind of keep an eye on. What are they really going to do there? They brought in, DJ Rader to really be that nose tackle. Geno Atkins is a true 3 technique. You could potentially play Carlos Dunlap at the 5, but then what do you do with Sam Hubbard? It's really going to be interesting to see what they do there. Are they going to run a 4-2-5? If you do that, then these linebackers aren't really going to see the field all that often. So I think you have to at least run a 4-3 defense to allow all of this talent there at the linebacker position to get out onto the football field. Round number 5, you get Khalid Kareem, 6'4", 268 pounds out of Notre Dame. If Julian Okwara was the explosive pass rusher, Khalid Kareem was more of the physical guy, physical presence, able to hold his own at the point of attack. He'll be backing up Dunlap and Hubbard, and then also Carl Lawson there. He'll be battling him for playing time in that rotation, but I think he's definitely a guy that's going to make the roster. He'll be battling Andrew Brown, if you remember him from a couple of years ago coming out of Virginia. Akeem Adeniji coming off the board in round number 6, 6'4", 302, played tackle at Kansas, possibly a guard. You have Jonah Williams at left tackle, Bobby Hart at right tackle. Adeniji could potentially fill in as a backup to Michael Jordan, Xavier Su'a-Filo on the interior of that line. Really what's happening with Billy Price. Is he going to be a starter? Is he not? He's really fallen out of favor there. So there's a chance that Akeem Adeniji could potentially be a guard, could be a tackle. That versatility gives him a lot of options there up front. And then round number 7, Marcus Bailey out of Purdue. I think the injuries really, hurt his draft stock quite a bit. Only played in 2 games for the Boilermakers as a senior, but as a junior, he was the heart and soul of that defense, for Jeff Brom and company, and a guy that I thought made plays all over the field. I thought he was instinctive. I thought he was shooting gaps. I thought he did really well watching, reading the quarterback's eyes, more of a zone, zone defender than a guy that can really match up in man-to-man. 6 foot 235. I think he has a great chance to make a roster. It may not be in Cincinnati with all the different linebackers, but I think he ends up making a roster. Keep an eye out for New England. I think that may end up being his final landing spot. Cleveland, Jedrick Wills on the board, number 10 overall. You have to protect Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, I think everyone was giving him a hard time about how he regressed in his sophomore season, that sophomore slump. And really what was happening was he had a left tackle and a right tackle. The 2 tackles just were not getting the job done. They couldn't protect him to save their lives. And he was ultimately running for his own life as a result. And so one of those things, he really got gun shy. Even when there wasn't a rush that was getting to him, Baker Mayfield was looking to get outside the pocket as quickly as possible, make plays outside and on the run, and that really got him into trouble. All he needed to do more often than not was step up, either slide subtly to avoid the rush, step up in the pocket, really do some of that pocket manipulation that he was known for at OU. He wasn't really able to do that because he was worried about having to avoid a sack. So I look at Jack Conklin as their right tackle. Jedrick Wills had the best pass sets for anyone in college football not named Penei Sewell out of Oregon, who's odds-on favorite to be the number 1 overall pick if the number 1 pick does not go to a team that needs a quarterback. If there is, then Trevor Lawrence is probably going to be number 1 overall, just saying. But Jedrick Wills has the talent to be a left tackle, 6'4", 312 pounds. Yes, he is only 6'4", but he has the arm length to really take care of that position. Round number 2, they get a safety in Grant Delpit, 6'3", 213 pounds out of LSU, a guy that can come in and ultimately start right away. I think this is really going to solidify that safety group. You have Carl Joseph at the strong safety. Grant Delpit can play the free. You also have Andrew Sendejo, the veteran, there in that group. That really gives them a strong presence there in the secondary. You also have Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams there at the cornerback position, which really, they brought in Kevin Johnson, the veteran, as well. You have Terrence Mitchell. So I think that secondary has definitely been upgraded. Round 2, I'm sorry, round number 3, you get Jordan Elliott out of Missouri, 6'4", 302, a guy who is very athletic. I think he's a guy that can ultimately end up teaming with Larry Ogunjobi. Sheldon Richardson's still on the roster, but I don't know for how long. I think Jordan Elliott, if he can show that he can get after the quarterback, that he can also be stout at the point of attack against the run, then Sheldon Richardson may ultimately be on the way out. Jacob Phillips out of LSU, 6'3", 229 pounds. He was the leading tackler there at LSU. Very athletic, a guy that can play. I think he can play inside and outside. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up there on that roster. You have Sione Takitaki and B.J. Goodson at middle linebacker. So he may end up being the Sam backer when it's all said and done. Round number 4, moving on to day 3, they end up taking Harrison Bryant, 6'5", 243 out of Florida Atlantic, the John Mackey Award winner, over 1,000-yard receiver. This was a curious pick for me. I think you could have gone receiver earlier in this draft. You ultimately ended up going with Donovan Peoples-Jones, and that was in round 6. 6'2", 212, and a guy you can't really look at his numbers. The production didn't really match the talent. This was a guy that had that over, I think, 44-inch vertical leap, runs pretty well, but he had poor quarterback play. And, so I think that really, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to end up being a better pro than he was a collegiate player. But you have Jarvis Landry, you have Odell Beckham Jr., you don't have Antonio Callaway on the roster anymore. You don't have Rashard Higgins on the roster anymore. You needed to go with another receiver, and instead, in round number 4, you go with Harrison Bryant when you already have David Njoku, and you brought in Austin Hooper as well. So kind of a curious pick there. Maybe they're looking at potentially David Njoku moving on from him. He's battled some injuries, hasn't really lived up to that first round hype to this point. So that might be looking at trying to land a second tight end to play ultimately alongside Austin Hooper. Round number 5, you get Nick Harris out of Washington, 6'1", 302, center guard. You have Joel Bitonio at left guard. You have Wyatt Teller at right guard. I think Nick Harris can end up filling in as a backup to either of those positions. You look at J.C. Treader as well at the center position. So I think Nick Harris can be that guy to ultimately be, the swing interior lineman, if there is such a thing. But I think that versatility is going to bode well there in Cleveland. Moving on to Dallas. Dallas's first 3 picks, I have no idea how they pulled this off to get all 3 of these names in that, off the board and in a Dallas Cowboy uniform. It's unreal. At 17, CeeDee Lamb. There are other picks that you could have gone with. You could have gone with a pass rusher. You could have gone with a corner. A lot of different options that were out there, but ultimately they decided to go with CeeDee Lamb, who I had as the number 1 wide receiver in the draft. All you have to do is put on the game against Texas in the Red River shootout, and you saw him just humble some corners and safeties in that game. Just very physical, a guy that attacks the football at the catch point, plucks the ball out of the air, and then in space, I thought he's really improved as a dynamic playmaker with the ball in his hands. This is a receiver who played with Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts. So a guy that really knows how to make the most out of that relationship with the quarterback. I think it's going to really bode well for Dak Prescott, who already has a couple of 1,000-yard receivers in Amari Cooper and then Michael Gallup. Yes, Michael Gallup was a 1,000-yard receiver last season. You get those 3 guys along with Ezekiel Elliott, and that's really a scary proposition for teams there in the NFC East. Round number 2, Trevon Diggs. 6'1", 205 out of Bama, converted wide receiver, has tremendous length. He has some size that he's bringing to this position. You have Chidobe Awuzie, Anthony Brown, smaller corners. You have Jordan Lewis as your nickel as well. Trevon Diggs definitely has tremendous length, a guy that can potentially challenge for a starting spot right away. And then in round 3, you get Neville Gallimore, the defensive tackle, 6'2", 304 out of Oklahoma. You have Gerald McCoy and Dontari Poe along that interior of the line, but then you bring in Gallimore. You have Tristan Hill from a season ago, Antoine Woods at nose tackle. I think what you're getting with Neville Gallimore is a guy that absolutely is a two-gap dude, a guy who has a really quick get-off, a guy who has a really nice swim move, pretty good rip move as well. Very athletic, very active, a guy that has a motor that doesn't quit, and a guy who's still learning. Look, he played in Canada, didn't really have much of a playbook to speak of. A guy who I think has his best days are ahead of him. I think he's just scratching the surface of his potential. Round 4, you double down on the cornerback position. You get a guy like Reggie Robinson out of Tulsa. Look, Tulsa had a couple of nice players there on the defensive side of the football. What you're getting with Robinson, again, 6'1", 205, ran a 4.4, 440, really good ball skills. So I really like that pick as well. Add some size to that secondary, and remember, Tyler Frederick, Travis Frederick, the center, abrupt retirement. He had his the medical ailments that ultimately put him out, and so. They brought in Joe Looney, and you have Connor McGovern on the roster, but getting Tyler Biadasz in round number 4, 6'4", 314 out of Wisconsin, not the best athlete in the world, but this is a guy is an intelligent player. He started every game in his career at Wisconsin, and look, he was the guy that was there blocking, almost every single one of Jonathan Taylor's yards, all 6,000 of them, and you had 3 offensive linemen go to the NFL in last year's draft with David Edwards and Michael Dieter and Bo Benshaw all gone. Cole Van Lanen, the left tackle, was kind of a part-time starter. So what's crazy is you bring in all of these new starters on that offensive line, and he still goes for over 2,000 yards. So to me, when I look at Tyler Biadasz, I think that that there is something there. This guy is going to be effective, and I think Dallas has got a guy. They found their future starter, and it's another Wisconsin Badger. Round number 5, you needed to get a pass rusher. I like Bradley Anae out of Utah, 6'3", 257. Didn't run a really quick 40 time at the combine, but that's not really what you're going to get out of Bradley Anae. This is a guy that knows how to get to the quarterback with his hand fighting. Not the longest arms in the world, but wins, again, like I said, with his hands. Can turn the corner a little bit, has some decent flexibility, better than average athlete. I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. 40 tackles for loss, 29.5 sacks in his career. Very physical player at the point of attack. So I definitely like this pick as well. Team him up with DeMarcus Lawrence, Tyrone Crawford and company. And then round 7, you get a potential backup quarterback for Dak Prescott and Ben DiNucci out of James Madison. Not really the quarterback, much of a quarterback to speak of at Pittsburgh. Last 2 seasons that James Madison really developed as a quarterback. 6'3", 210 pounds. I like the pick in round 7 because, look, he's a guy that I think has a chance to be a solid backup. I thought that his development over the last 2 years at James Madison really was eye-opening. Denver, the Broncos. We knew they were going to go receiver, right? I wasn't expecting them to double down on receiver, but I knew they were going to go receiver. Drew Lock was missing something last year. He was missing that vertical presence on the outside. And really what his comfort level was having Emmanuel Hall, having his speedster on the outside that he was able to go to, drop the ball in over his shoulder. And yes, Emmanuel Hall battled some drops, and I think part of it too was he was injured for half the time. But when he was healthy, when he was out there, Drew Lock, that's when he was at his best. He had his safety net, his security blanket out there, a guy that he could just drop the ball into, and Locke would hit him in stride. He also had his tight end Albert Oebunam, up the middle of the field, a guy that he was able to fit the ball into quite a bit. I thought Oebunam's tape saw a little bit of a regression, but he was playing with Kelly Bryant and not Drew Lock. So why not team up with him? Stay tuned for that. Potentially a 4th round pick. Quick spoiler here. But in round number 1, Jerry Jeudy falls to them. And look, you can say what you want about Jerry Jeudy. 6'1", 193, one of the best route runners I've seen come out of college in the 20 years that I've been doing mock drafts. A guy who, like I said, exceptional, very sudden off the football. The stems, his ability to really set up his man. And once he puts his foot in the ground and makes his cuts, he puts those DBs in a spin cycle. They really don't know what hit him. The Biletnikoff Award winner in 2018 and ran a sub 4.5 40. I really love that pick. Round 2, a little curious. They take KJ Hamler out of Penn State, 5'9", 176, ran in the 4.2s to 4.3s in individual workouts. Definitely explosive for Penn State when the ball was in his hands. The thing that I worry about is he's not a natural pass catcher, lets the balls get into his body quite a bit, allows defensive backs to make plays on the ball. Also quite a few drops. That's what concerned me. I had him more in the 3rd to 4th round range. So that was a little bit of a curious pick, but at the same time, they're looking to get some explosiveness. They have Cortland Sutton on the roster. Deshaun Hamilton, was the number 2 wide receiver. They're looking to get explosiveness, and so I get that's why they brought in KJ Hamler there. Round number 3, I think these 3 picks, I like all 3 of them. Michael Ojemudia out of Iowa. Look, big physical corner, and a guy who has the ball skills, and showed off at the Senior Bowl an ability to get physical with big receivers like Chase Claypool, and ran a 4.45 40 at the combine. Decent length for the position as well. And for me, I look at Ojemudia, that big physical style, could potentially end up getting him that starting spot opposite AJ Boye when it's all said and done. Lloyd Cushenberry, the center out of LSU, had a better 2018 season than 2019, but look, 6'3", 312 pounds. I think he'll be a day 1 starter. Graham Glasgow is going to start probably at right guard opposite, Dalton Reisner at left guard. Lloyd Cushenberry slides into that center position. I think that makes the most sense. And then the last pick in round number 3, it's number 31 overall, 6'3", 309 pound, McTelvin Agim. And Agim, I think he could potentially be that nose tackle, battle Mike Purcell. I thought Leki Fotu would potentially be the pick there in round number 4, but ultimately I like Agim. I think he could also play, the 5 technique. Somebody who I think is stout at the point of attack, also offers some pass rush ability, and ran a sub 5.40 at the combine. So I thought they did really well there. I had him in the 3rd to 4th round range, so really nice value. And I mentioned Albert Oebunam, the 12th pick into day 3, and they take big Albert, 6'6", 258 pounds. Albert O set the stage on fire. Freshman All-America, had 11 touchdowns as a true freshman there at Mizzou. As a redshirt freshman at Mizzou. A guy who battled some injuries, not the most polished route runner, not much of a blocker, but look, sub 4.5 speed, and he has that connection already with Drew Lock. I think you put him in there with Noah Fant, makes things interesting. I think they're looking to add some of those weapons. I mentioned that explosiveness. This is a really packed tight end group. You have Jeff Hireman, you have Troy Fumagalli, Jake Butt, Nick Vanette, a lot of guys that played really well, collegiately. But they haven't really done a whole lot at the NFL level. So Albert O, really a congested group there at the tight end position. They just brought in Nick Vanette from Pittsburgh, but the ability to get somebody that Drew Lock is familiar with and is so explosive, that'll be a player to keep an eye on as we go into training camp and really see what he does in the preseason. Round number 5, they get Justin Sternot out of Wake Forest, 6'3", 238 pounds. I thought this was definitely a great value pick. I've mentioned that they needed to address that interior linebacker position. I thought that Malik Harrison was a nice pick in round number 3. They get Justin Sternot in round 5, and I think that's also a great spot for Sternad. A guy who, veteran player there for the Demon Deacons. 105 tackles in 2018, just played in 7 games as a senior, but a guy who I think can drop into coverage a little bit. has decent range. I think he's better in zone coverage versus man-to-man, but definitely a player that I think can end up making the roster and potentially being a starter down the road. Netani Muti in round number 6 at the top of round 6, second pick in that round, 6'3", 315 out of Fresno State, big mauling guard. Put up 225 44 times at the combine, but he's had multiple ACL surgeries. I think that's what ultimately moved him down on the draft board. Some people were talking about him as a potential fringe first round player. Fell all the way to round 6. And I mentioned Reisner, I mentioned Glasgow on that roster. He's going to really be a guy that's could potentially be that third guard in the rotation, but he's going to have to make sure that he stays healthy in order to be able to do that. Round 7, a couple of rotational players. Tyree Cleveland, 6'2", 209 out of Florida. Decent athlete there at the position. And then Derek Tuska out of North Dakota State. Was the second to last, so it wasn't Mr. Irrelevant. So second to last pick in the draft, 6'4", 251 out of North Dakota State. And this was a guy who, I think limited athletically, but still had that nonstop motor, a guy that can bend coming off the edge. And, I wonder if he has enough athleticism to be an outside linebacker in a 3-4 defense. And I also wonder if he has enough size to be, playing with his hand in the ground in a 43 defense. So remains to be seen what he can do there. So let's see. Moving on, we've got the Detroit Lions next. Matt Patricia and company, I think, really time is of the essence for them. Matt Patricia really has to make some progress there in Detroit. And, you trade Darius Slay and, you bring in Desmond Trufant to take over one spot there in the starting position, but you need to get another lockdown corner. Jeff Okudah, I think, is a better prospect overall than Denzel Ward was. 6'1", 200 pounds. Runs in the 4.4s, over a 40-inch vertical leap, tremendous ball skills. I think his cover ability is off the charts. A guy that just sticks like glue, plays on that ball side hip on those in-breaking routes, has that lockdown ability, and a guy that can play out on an island if you need him to. Great pick there at the third pick in round number 1. Third pick on day 2. They addressed the running back position. I figured that the Lions were going to do that on day 2. You have Kerryon Johnson, but he's battled some injuries. And get DeAndre Swift, 5'8", 212 out of Georgia. Limited carries, still have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. And I say limited because he shared the backfield with Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Elijah Holyfield, and then this season with Brian Herrien, Zamir White, and James Cook. Still back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Very explosive athlete, tremendous pass catcher as well. This is a guy who I think can definitely team with Kerryon Johnson in that backfield, but has a chance to potentially even be a breakout starter when it's all said and done. Keep an eye out for DeAndre Swift. And then 2 picks in round number 3. They get 2 guys who I think can also start. Julian Okwara out of Notre Dame, 6'4", 252 pounds. Okwara's not going to start ahead of Trey Flowers, but he'll actually be battling his brother Romeo for a starting spot. So you're going to have the 2 Okwara brothers, both Notre Dame players. Okwara is more of the big physical presence. Julian Okwara has tremendous length and athleticism coming off the edge. Broken fibula ultimately ended his 2019 campaign, but a guy at 100%. I love the length coming off the edge. I thought that was a great pick. And then Jonah Jackson. 6'4", 306 out of Ohio State. Not the tremendous athlete by any means, but a guy who I thought was really a good technician and the most consistent offensive lineman there for Ohio State, which is saying something because I thought Wyatt Davis there up front was really a tremendous offensive lineman there for the Buckeyes. You have Joe Dahl at left guard, Ode Abushi at right guard, and if I'm the 2 of them, I really worry about my starting spot. I got a couple of guys that are coming in that are really going to challenge, really going to be hungry and challenge me for my starting spot. Because in round 4, they double down, get another guard. They get Logan Stenberg out of Kentucky. He's the big physical presence there, more of a mauler type, 6'6", 317. If nothing else, they add depth to that interior line. But, if I'm Joe Dahl and I'm Ode Ibushi, I'm keeping an eye out for my starting spot. I'm playing for my job at that point. Fifth round, they get a tremendous receiver, in my opinion, in Quintez Cephas out of Wisconsin, 6'1", 202. If you remember, Quintez Cephas was the guy who, at Wisconsin, missed the 2018 season, was charged with sexual assault, was exonerated in court, was welcomed back to the University of Wisconsin. Football team brought him back as well, and was a vertical threat for Wisconsin. Ran a 4.7 40, and I thought, it was kind of just a sloppy start. Didn't really run well there at the combine, but I think he ran in the high 4.5s after that in a workout, and it just seemed like he was always getting behind defenders. I thought he won at the line of scrimmage, and then able to get some separation after that. Can stack the corner, just about as well as any receiver in this draft class. And I look at Kenny Golladay, there's Marvin Jones and Danny Amendola on the roster. I think Quintez Cephas fits right into that group and could potentially be that nice complementary piece there for your 1,000-yard receiver in Kenny Golladay. Round number 5, Jason Huntley out of New Mexico State, 5'8", 190 pounds. So you're doubling down at the running back position. And what's really interesting about Jason Huntley is the hands. I think that's one of the things that you talk about. This is a guy in his career, over 100 receptions in his career at the running back position. I mean, 134 to be exact. In the last 3 seasons, never had less than 39 receptions in a season. Finally went over the 1,000-yard mark in 2019, had 7.1 yards per carry on the year as well for the Aggies. He's a guy that, I actually really love the pick, and I think he could end up being that third running back in that group, and yet another weapon there for Matthew Stafford. Round 6, you get John Pennicini out of Utah, 6'1", 318 pounds. That's more of a nose tackle. I would have liked to have seen them potentially address the 3 technique up front. I think Pennicini is ultimately going to be a backup for Danny Shelton. So like I said, I think if there's anything with the Lions that I would have liked to seen them do different, I would have liked to seen them really address that 3 technique more than anything else. And then round 7, they get Jayshon Cornell out of Ohio State, 6'3", 285, a 1-year starter there. Guy who does a decent job setting the edge against the run. But when I look at this lineup, you've got both of the Aquara brothers. You have Trey Flowers, Austin Bryant, Deshaun Hand, Frank Herron. I think Cornell's really going to have to work hard to make the roster. May end up getting onto the practice squad, but I think they're pretty much set at the defensive end position. Which leads us to Green Bay, the Cheeseheads. Okay, Brett Favre was 35 years of age when Aaron Rodgers was drafted. Aaron Rodgers is 36. You have a new head coach in Matt LaFleur. Is now really the time to draft for the future when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback and really you're in a win now, should be in a win now mentality? I mean, this almost feels like it's sealing the fate that Aaron Rodgers will not finish his career, much like Brett Favre, will not finish his career as a Green Bay Packer. You needed a receiver to help out Davante Adams. I thought, Alan Lazard did a great job filling in to help him out. But, Davante Adams, there's a reason why he's an all-pro wideout. And really they're standing pat with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who has inconsistent hands. Equinemius St. Brown has battled injuries. Devin Funchess, they brought in from Indy. He's also battled injuries, by the way, as well. So that receiving core, really questionable, at best. So you bring in Jordan Love as your quarterback with the 26th overall pick. You trade up from 30 to get him. And look, Jordan Love, yes, I know, 2018, he had the 4 offensive linemen that were all Mountain West performers, had his top 5 wideouts, had a 1,000-yard running back, and then in 2019 was pressing because, not only did he lose all of those guys, he also lost his head coach and his offensive coordinator. 20 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. But a guy who has some physical abilities that a lot of the quarterbacks in this draft class just didn't have. He has the size, he has the athleticism, he has the arm strength, the ability to throw a fastball and fit it into a tight window on one play, and then show the touch to drop it over the linebacker in front of the safety in zone coverage. So the accuracy is absolutely there. It's more decision making than anything else with Jordan Love. So I love the player. I just question right now what's going on there with Green Bay. In round 2, they then take A.J. Dillon. They double down with these odd picks, and 6 foot 247 out of Boston College. I love A.J. Dillon. Don't get me wrong. 3-time 1,000-yard runner. As a sophomore, battled a high ankle sprain and still went over 1,000 yards. And in 2019, even though he was sharing the backfield with David Bailey, still had over 1,600 yards on the ground. You have Aaron Jones, you have Jamal Williams already on the roster. I mean, are we already anticipating that one of the two of them won't be on the roster in 2021? That's really kind of a curious decision. It seems like they're really planning more for the future than anything else. They needed a tight end, and at one point I was expecting them to either take Cole Kmet or Adam Troutman, but they take Josiah DeGuara, a guy who I had more as a mid to late round pick, 6'2", 242 out of Cincinnati, a guy who I don't think is, he made a couple of receptions down the field there for the Bearcats, but not a guy who I thought you would consider to be a consistent downfield threat. And really for the Packers, this is a guy that I think is going to end up being more of a fullback H-back type than your traditional tight end. And you have Mercedes Lewis, you have Jay Sternberger on the roster as well. So maybe they're going to be looking at doing something like the Patriots do with multiple tight end sets. Maybe that's really what they're going for here with Josiah DeGuara. Round number 5, they get Kamal Martin out of Minnesota, 6'3", 240 pounds. And what's interesting with Kamal Martin is I think he has some versatility to play inside or outside. I think ultimately his home's going to be at inside backup Oren Burks and Christian Kirksey, but he has that versatility to play either inside or out in their 34 defense. Round 6, they go with 3 offensive linemen. John Runyon out of Michigan, 6'4", 306. The tackle plays guard. Will probably end up playing guard at the next level. You get Jake Hansen, the center out of Oregon, 6'4", 303, started over 40 games. Then you get Simon Stepaniak, 6'4", 313 out of Indiana, most consistent player there for the Hoosiers up front. Was a team captain, big physical dude, 37 reps at 225 in the bench press, so very powerful guy as well. You look at the interior of that line, you have Lane Johnson, Billy Turner, Corey Lindsley. You're adding some depth there at the position. You already have Elgton Jenkins, so it makes you wonder, what the thought process is there. I really thought they were going to go with a tackle in this group, so maybe the fact that John Runyon's on the roster, maybe they're expecting him to potentially be the backup for Bakhtiari, David Bakhtiari, and Ricky Wagner. So kind of a curious nature, with how they handled that piece, because I look at the defensive end position. You have Dean Lowry and Tyler Lancaster really as slated as your starters at at defensive end. And 2 guys that I think struggled at times. You have Kingsley Kiki and James Looney on the roster. You end up bringing in Jonathan Garvin in round number 7, a guy 6'4", 263. Is he an outside linebacker? Is he going to end up backing up Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith? Is he going to be a backup there? Or are you going to potentially put him into that 5 technique? If not, then you're really rolling with what you already have on the roster. And I think an upgrade was absolutely necessary. So I think they missed the board there, with the wide receiver and defensive end. And then even in round 7, they take Vernon Scott, 6'1", 205 out of TCU. I thought was a nice role player potentially at the next level, but not a guy that I thought was going to make a significant impact. So I was kind of surprised with that pick as well. So really some curious picks there out of Green Bay. Houston only had 5 picks in the draft. And, I think the trade of DeAndre Hopkins really has everyone guessing what's going on with Bill O'Brien. What is really happening with this roster? They make the trade for Brandon Cooks. They bring him in. You have Kenny Stills. You have Randall Cobb. But again, none of those guys are named DeAndre Hopkins. So Deshaun Watson, he's got some speed there to throw the football to. He also has David Johnson there in the backfield with Lamar Miller no longer there. So round 2, Houston ends up targeting a defensive tackle. And, Ross Blacklock, 290 pounds, twitched up dude, a guy who I think, has the ability to bend coming off the edge. Really did that from an interior, the interior, bending around a lot of the interior linemen, which is rare at that defensive tackle position. You've got J.J. Watt on one side, then there's Angelo Blackson, Charles Omenihu on the opposite side. I think Ross Blacklock could end up playing his way into a starting spot when it's all said and done. I love the athleticism there. They get Jonathan Grenard out of Florida, 6'3", 263 pounds. Another guy who knows how to put pressure on the quarterback. I think they needed to address the outside linebacker position. You have Whitney Merciless on the roster, Duke Ejiofor, Jacob Martin, Brennan Scarlett. Not really going to scare you too much putting pressure on the quarterback there from Scarlett. So Jonathan Grenard comes in there. I think he'll be into that rotation and could potentially end up being a backup there early on in his career. Has fringe starter potential as well. Charlie Heck out of North Carolina, 6'8", 311 pounds, moves pretty well. His dad, John, played in the NFL. And you look at, Laramie Tunsil, Titus Howard, they're really set at the tackle position. What could be interesting is, do you move Charlie Heck potentially inside? Zach Fulton, is the one guy that you could potentially argue might be, they might be in need of an upgrade. Senio Kelemete is his backup. So I think that right guard position, left guard, they're set. Max Sharping is absolutely the dude. The left side with Laramie Tunsil as well. Titus Howard at right tackle, no questions there. I think Charlie Heck could be the swing tackle and, also has, potential to play inside. Round 4, John Reed out of Penn State, 5'10", 187 pounds. A guy who has some ball skills. But for me, this was a guy that I thought was limited. He made some plays, but there were a lot of I thought he got burned quite a bit as well. And you look at the secondary, they have Vernon Hargraves, they have Garyon Conley, they have Lonnie Johnson, they have Phillip Gaines. So bringing in John Reed into this, Bradley Roby as well. I thought that was kind of a curious pick there in round number 4. Especially, considering that wasn't a guy that I had high on my draft board. Round number 5, I think they get a good receiver, though, in Isaiah Coulter out of Rhode Island, 6'2", 198 pounds. He was more of the athletic receiver there. You had the more physical receiver in Aaron Parker. But what I look at with Isaiah Coulter, ran a 4.45 40 at the combine, 36-inch vertical leap. But over 1,000 yards as the receiver there for the Rams of Rhode Island as a junior. He was the only FCS receiver to come out as a junior. And let's see, 8 touchdowns, 12 total in his career. A guy who I think is an ascending prospect. So you get him on the roster. He's a bigger guy. That's really what you're lacking when you have Cooks, Stills, Randall Cobb, Will Fuller, Kiki Cutie. You needed a bigger receiver, so that makes sense bringing Isaiah Coulter in there. But really some curious picks overall there for Houston. Really kind of was the theme overall for the Texans this offseason. And then Indianapolis, the Colts. They get their 3 technique that Chris Ballard said that's really who drives their defense, was a 3 technique. They get DeForest Buckner. They trade away the 13th overall pick. They had 2 picks in round 2, and they get 2 stellar offensive players. They get Michael Pittman Jr. with the 2nd pick in round 2. And I had Michael Pittman Jr. going to the Colts for a while. I thought this was a nice compliment to T.Y. Hilton. I think he's going to be a starter right away. And I think he'll end up becoming a favorite target of Phillip Rivers. Now look, Michael Pittman Jr., 101 receptions, over 1,200 yards for the Trojans, double-digit touchdowns. Put on the game against Utah, and that was about as dominant a performance as you're going to see from a receiver. 10 catches, 232 yards, 2 touchdowns. A guy that I thought got vertical, got behind some really good defensive backs. 3 DBs in Julian Blackmon, Terrell Burgess, and the aforementioned Jalen Johnson. None of those guys could cover him. He got vertical, was able to create late separation, elevate, make the catch over them, and then once he had the ball in his hands, was so difficult to bring down and actually was running away from some guys. People were worried about his long speed. He's not Alshon Jeffrey. Ran a 4.5 240, plenty fast, and a guy. Look, he's somebody to me that is an ascending prospect. Is a guy that I thought could potentially be a first round pick, and ended up coming off the board, second pick in round number 2. And I think Phillip Rivers is going to love this guy. 6'4", 223 pounds. They said on draft night that Brian Kelly said that, Michael Pittman Jr., you can't have, the Trojans may beat him, but we don't want Michael Pittman Jr. to beat us. And multiple teams did that. Anytime USC lost, they lost to Washington. They did lose to Notre Dame. They lost to Iowa. Teams were targeting Michael Pittman Jr. And when you target this guy and you design and really scheme your defense around stopping one player, you have other NFL potential receivers in Tyler Vaughns, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London. We're keying in on number 6. There aren't too many receivers that are out there that really saw that type of attention. I think he has the potential to be a special receiver. Then they get Jonathan Taylor, just 7 picks later, 5'10", 226 pounds out of Wisconsin. Look, back-to-back Doak Walker Award winner, a guy who is going to back up Marlon Mack and definitely has starter potential. Look, he has 968 total touches in his career, so obviously the wear on his legs is going to be a concern, at least allowing him to share the backfield with Marlon Mack, at least early on in his career, is going to kind of help a little bit. But look, back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons. Only he and one other player, Troy Davis, in the 90s out of Iowa State, were able to do that. A guy who ran a 4.39 40 at the combine at 5'10", 226 pounds, has 10 400 meter speed as well. Has the power to run through you, has the speed to run by you. He'll run over you. And a guy who I think is really patient as well. He allows the blocks to set up and then he explodes through those holes. And once he gets ahead of steam and that momentum going north-south, watch out. You're really in trouble there. And with Marlon Mack, he's under contract through 2020, will be a free agent at the end of the season. So this could potentially be your future starter when it's all said and done in 2021 there for the Indianapolis Colts. So I thought 2 great picks there for Chris Ballard right off the bat. You get Julian Blackmon, the safety out of Utah, 6 foot, 187 pounds, in round number 3. And when I look at Indianapolis, I thought they needed to get a safety. You've got Kari Willis and Malik Hooker. I think Julian Blackmon could potentially team with Hooker when it's all said and done in that secondary. I think Blackmon, a converted corner, has some decent ball skills as well. You look at finding a quarterback. I thought that it was going to be the Colts that traded up for Jordan Love, trading into the first round. But instead, they stay put. 4th round, they get Jacob Eason with the 16th pick in round number 4. 6'6", 231 pounds out of Washington. I think the reason why he fell to day 3 ultimately was the fact that there are some holes in his game right now. This is a guy who really can't change speeds. He really throws a fastball, and it's fast and faster, and lacks some of that touch. Being able to throw drop the ball in and hit a receiver in stride and not just actually gun it at the receiver. He sailed balls over guys a lot of times, didn't have enough air under the ball. He needs to work on that touch. He's going to be playing behind Phillip Rivers. I think he'll get to play behind a future Hall of Famer and really soak up all of that. I think that's I like the value. I like 4th round. That's about the range that I had Jacob Eason going. So I really like that selection as well. In round number 5, they get Danny Pinter, who I think is a future starter. A guy who played all along the line there at Ball State. I look at you've got Ryan Kelly and you've got Quentin Nelson. Obviously, those are the two guys that are going to be starting at center and left guard, respectively. You've got Mark Lewinsky, and I think Danny Pinter has a chance to target Mark Lewinsky and potentially be an upgrade there at that right guard position. Anthony Costanzo at left tackle, and Braden Smith at right tackle. I think you really solidified that front up front. At least if nothing else, he's a nice player with some depth, can play multiple positions. Round 6. Here's the thing at the defensive tackle position. They were lacking some guys over 300 pounds. They bring in DeForest Buckner. They have Glover Stewart. So they have two big, powerful guys. But on the roster at defensive tackle, you have Danico Autry, you have Sheldon Day, Tyquan Lewis, guys that are under 300 pounds, but guys that are very quick and explosive off the ball. Robert Windsor is 6'4", 290 out of Penn State, a guy who was productive there for the Nittany Lions, getting after the quarterback. So I like his potential. I think he fits into that Colts quicker than big philosophy there. But I think you have to watch getting overpowered at the line of scrimmage. But like I said, 13 sacks in his career, including 6.5 in 2018. He's a guy that I think can play his way into the rotation and will offer some interior pass rush ability. Second pick in round number 6, you got Isaiah Rodgers out of UMass, 5'10", 170 pounds, but a dude that he just made plays for the Minutemen. I'm really glad to see that a team took a chance on Isaiah Rodgers because, look, 34 pass breakups in his career, 11 interceptions, including 4 this past season, and 9.5 tackles for loss. So he's not afraid to come up in run support. Took a punt back for touchdown in 2019 as a senior as well. Also a kick returner for the Minutemen. So I really liked this pick. I thought Chris Ballard yet again, with a tremendous draft. And where does he fit? Is kind of the question. You have Xavier Rhodes that you brought in, TJ Carey, Rock Ya-Sin, Kenny Moore, Marvell Tell, a lot of different corners there. But I think the versatility of Isaiah Rodgers, not all of those guys are going to be on the roster in 2021. I think Isaiah Rodgers is the guy, who can make an impact in special teams right away. He and Nyheim Hines, and then could ultimately make his way out onto the football field, not just on special teams. Probably a year or two away, but a guy who I think has that potential because of those ball skills. I get a big physical receiver in round number 6 in Desmond Patton, 6'4", 225 pounds out of Washington State. And look, this is a guy who has that big frame, ran a sub 4.5 40, and that's really, I think, what ultimately got him drafted was that 40 time. He was a big physical guy, didn't always see the field there at Wazoo. But let's take a look at this receiving core. You have Paris Campbell, you have T.Y. Hilton. Obviously, you've already added a big physical receiver, Michael Pittman. You have Zach Pascal, who I thought really stepped up and played well at the receiver position, especially when Devin Funchess went down. After that, Artavis Scott, Marcus Johnson. I think Desmond Patton has a chance to be that 5th receiver. You have a couple of explosive playmakers. You have a couple of bigger wideouts, and Desmond Patton, the fact that he ran sub 4.5, I think is really what's kind of turning heads a little bit, that there's more athleticism to this big guy. And then finally, for the Colts, Jordan Glasgow, out of Michigan, 6'1", 226 pounds, linebacker, safety, hybrid type, a guy who I think could be a special teams player. But that linebacking core, you have Bobby Okereke, Anthony Walker, Darius Leonard. It's really set there, and then you have EJ Speed, Sky Moore, Jerry Green, Matthew Adams, Zaire Franklin. A lot of names there at that linebacking core. So it's really kind of a loaded position. Safety, I already mentioned, Julian Blackman, Kari Willis, Malik Hooker. So that may be ultimately where Jordan Glasgow fits, is at the safety position when it's all said and done. More of a special teams guy. I think he's a developmental prospect when it's all said and done as well. So I think this is a good stopping point at this point. We've covered the first 14 teams, and we'll go ahead and address the remaining teams when we have our next podcast. I'm going to go ahead and release another one tomorrow and we'll go ahead and round out all 32 of the drafts, all 32 teams, and take a look at that. And then the final podcast of the 2020 podcast series, episode 41, we're going to really take a look at the undrafted free agents and then jump into the 2021 draft, really a look ahead, take a look at some of the quarterbacks not named, Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. Is there anybody that could potentially, oust Penei Sewell as the top overall prospect when it's all said and done? It's going to be interesting to see. But we'll talk about, in this next podcast, we'll talk about the Jaguars. I thought they did a lot of really nice things. We'll take a look at the Chargers. Traded back into round 1 to get Kenneth Murray. I like what they did there. Raiders, some curious picks. Dolphins, some curious picks. So we'll make sure to talk about that as well. Patriots, I thought they did some nice things at the top of the draft. Then it got a little weird as we moved on. The Saints, only 4 picks in the draft. Some odd selections, mixed with a couple of really nice picks there as well. So it's going to be fun. We're going to go ahead and break down the rest of these teams, really take a look at each of the draft picks and break everything down as we always do here for readyforthedraft.com. So everyone, have a great day. Take care. Hope you've enjoyed the content, and come back. We'll do it all again tomorrow. We'll go ahead and break down the remaining teams. Take care, everyone. Be safe. I know, wash your hands. Make sure, social distancing, wear your masks in public, and we'll go ahead and do all of this all over again tomorrow. So for readyforthedraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone, and until next time, I am out of here.